Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDRs, but hey, it's something. Now, this is the day where my problems with officially becomes its own thing. Because since Thoughts On is over, this has become the replacement for it. Very enthused about this update, because I think this will be better spent than focusing on shitting on some content creator that I don't care about, but rather shitting on political organizations that I think can do better. Also, one more thing about housewarming is currently there is a windstorm behind me, so if you hear anything in the background, that is what it is. It's wind and whatever. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, an update of a news story that just happened. I think I talked about this in the last episode, because, anyways, it's the story about Lee Jae-Myung, because they confirmed what his attacker was doing. It has finally officially been confirmed what his attacker was doing, and, shock of all shocks, it was a politically motivated attack, stating that the attacker, according to the police commissioner Woo Cheol-myun, quote, the suspect stated that he held a grudge that the victim, Lee Jae-Myung, was not properly punished, and he wanted to prevent the victim from becoming president, stop him from giving nominations to certain groups, and taking a majority of seats in the upcoming general election. That is why he decided to kill the victim. And the victim is not killed, so common reactionary L. But yes, remember, there's actually going to be South Korean elections this year. And not just, this is the first time that we're going to see new, well, not necessarily new, but, this is the first time we're seeing sort of faces in regards to the changing of the South Korean politics. Because, as we all know, the recent, Yoon Suk-yeol victory, but also the change with the Democratic Party now that Lee Jae-Myung is the one in charge. So there's a lot of pressure to do certain things, especially considering the current vote total is a bit interesting, with the incumbent presidential party, People Power, having 112 seats, with the Democratic Party having 168 seats. And this is a funny thing. If you look at the fucking, page, literally just look at it. 3 people are one party, and the Justice Party has 6 people. So literally 9 people of opposing parties. That's pretty funny. To the point where apparently the Justice Party is some members of the Justice Party are floating a chance to have the Justice Party align with all of these other political parties. But here's the real truth. That person, would-be assassin, literally just gave a huge boost to the Democratic Party of Korea. So, oops. Speaking of oops, the next story comes from Israel, because, shock of all shocks, Israel is doing some, not good things. Alright, so currently there is a plan being floated around in the Knesset trying to push for Ofer Kasif to be permanently expelled from the Knesset. If you do not remember, Kasif is a member of Hadash-Ta'al who has been very heavily, known for his issue on the current Israel-Palestine situation. And one of the biggest things is that he is currently part of South Africa's charge against Israel, because South Africa is currently leading a thing for the International Court to charge Israel with genocide due to their position with Palestine. And there have been a lot of political parties and figures around the world that have been making their voices heard in regards to this issue, many of which people on this channel know and /or love, including but not limited to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Jeremy Corbyn, some basic stuff, with many people in the Israeli parliament saying that this is essentially him betraying, they're basically calling him a traitor, which is not true, because if it's traitorous to call out your own country, then that's a little bit of a problem. Not much else more I can say on that. Let's move on to Latin America, because one big thing has happened in a nation that has a little bit of a issue. The country of Ecuador is currently facing a state of emergency, because, for those who don't know, for those who don't remember, Ecuador is one of the few Latin American countries currently that is not governed by a left-wing party. they elected a center-right guy by the name of Daniel Noboa. Noboa, while still being right-wing, has tried to paint himself as a little bit of a populist in some regards. And one of the things that he's been doing is trying to implement the policies of another, quote-unquote, populist in the region. He is trying to implement policies very much similar to Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. And if you don't remember, Nayib Bukele is a guy who is basically declared himself dictator of his own country and is known for his very tough on crime policies that he basically steamrolled to get into office to begin with, that many other Latin American right-wing people have been trying to copy the success of. If you want to know more about the situation in El Salvador, January 29th will be a day that you really like. But here's what ended up happening. Noboa decided to announce to the world, and most particularly his country, that he would start implementing security policies very much like Nayib Bukele. And almost immediately after he announced that he would be implementing these really tough on crime policies, crime exploded in fucking Ecuador. Prisoners have escaped prison, including some of the most prominent criminals within Ecuador. Dead bodies have started appearing randomly in areas, including, but not limited to, many people being dismembered. Police officers have been bombed. And one of the more infamous incidents was that an Ecuadorian news channel was held hostage by many armed gangs. Now, what is very interesting is the fact that a lot of people have been trying to say a lot of different things about Ecuador, and surprisingly, most, if not all of the people who have been saying things about Ecuador have completely missed the mark. And one of the biggest ones has been the eternal blame on Rafael Correa. Many people saying that Rafael Correa is the one who is truly responsible for this because of many baseless accusations, with one very heavy criticism that is always levied to these types of people, that they turned the country into a narco state, despite the fact that Ecuador had never really had a problem with drugs up until after Rafael Correa left office. In fact, Correa's term in office was literally the best that any single president in Ecuador had. Ecuador, up until Correa left office, was considered the safest Latin American country, or at least one of the Latin American countries, the safest Latin American country. Literally, let's look at this. The homicide rate in Ecuador, the first year that Correa took office, 16.2%. Correa's last year in office, 5.8%. Then, after Correa left office, the homicide rate shot up immensely. And one of the biggest reasons why the homicide rate dropped so low was a very obvious answer, due to the fact that Correa focused on eliminating the root of the problem in crime. That's one of the things a lot of these pink-tide leaders, they always understand this. Rather than just trying to criminalize and throw people in jail, they need to tackle the root of the problem, which is poverty. And surprisingly, when the poverty rate goes down, so too does the crime rate. But no, it was Correa's fault that these right-wing figures did bad things. And I mean, the crime rate didn't even get that bad, literally until Noboa said, hey, I'm going to govern as if I'm basically a dictator in regards to crime. Surprisingly, when you basically make it your apparent point that we're going to do extreme harsh war against criminals, criminals start fighting back. When you tackle the root of the problem, crime goes down. And it's weird, because even Correa has given his support to Noboa. He said, Noboa, I understand that you're in a very, tough situation, so I think we need to do our best to make sure that this crime situation is resolved. It's he's not even, giving huge criticisms to Noboa, which I would be doing in his administration, in his place. But, I guess Correa is, nicer than I am. I don't understand. Why is everybody fucking... it's just red baiting. It's literally just red baiting. I don't understand why everybody is so mad at Correa of all of them. Like, Correa doesn't seem like that bad of any of the Pink Tide leaders. Anyways, speaking of like Pink Tide, one country that's also going to be dealing with the Pink Tide is Mexico. But something has happened in Mexico that'll finally put something at ease. Finally, after all of these years, it is done. I think, as far as we know, the process for the Mexican presidential election will finally end on the 20th. Because on the 20th, that is when the citizens movement is going to officially announce their candidate. A candidate that they have already, basically announced their support for. Like, they announced their support for him recently, like the 9th, and the 20th is when they're going to officially register him. And then after that, it'll be done. Because, like, the independent candidates have currently been kicked off the ballot. There's a chance that one or multiple of them might appeal the decision and then might get back on the ballot. But as of now, we are about to have the last presidential candidate in the incumbent, like in Mexico for 2024. And that candidate is a man by the name of Jorge Alvarez Mañez. He will be the candidate of the citizens movement. He is a deputy from Zacatecas, and he is an ally of Samuel Garcia. Basically, the situation went around like this. If you don't remember, Samuel Garcia, he tried to run for president under the citizens movement, but then he was kicked out because the Nuevo Leon, like people, wouldn't appoint a citizens movement governor to be his replacement, and instead wanted to choose someone of the PRIAN. So in order to keep the MC properly represented in Nuevo Leon, he had to resign and basically go back to being the governor of Nuevo Leon. And that left the citizens movement in a little bit of a bind, because they literally just certified Garcia as their candidate, and then, they basically pulled strings behind the scenes to get him to be the candidate anyways. And then, he just had to go oops, I'm not running anymore, sorry. So they had to be immediately put into we had to figure out what the fuck to do. And there were a couple of people who tried to float their names as we'll be good replacements. Patricia Mercado, who ran for the presidency prior. There was a senator named Juan Zepeda who also was interested. But the one thing people were trying to figure out was if it was inevitably going to be Dante Delgado, who is the leader of the citizens movement. But Jorge had actually positioned himself to basically be the replacement nominee. He was an ally to Samuel Garcia. He was actually a presidential, he was the advisor to Garcia's presidential bid. And then he basically floated himself as I'm the one who's basically the person who will be Garcia. And the only thing that was a problem is that many people are not necessarily sure if he has the best chance of being a good citizens movement candidate, because again, they wanted Samuel Garcia or Luis Donaldo Colosio, but neither of them ended up running, so they needed somebody. And the only other person, and every time he would try to find anybody else, they just wouldn't run. For some reason, he could, Dante Delgado could not find anybody to run. His first choice was Enrique Alfaro, but he wanted to basically support the Fuerza y Corazón candidate, Xochitl Galvez. And Colosio didn't want to be held responsible for divided opposition. So it was basically, literally, I was thinking that Delgado would probably be the candidate because no one else was interested in running solo. But it turns out Jorge has stepped to the plate to be the next candidate. There are two things that make Jorge Alvarez, well, actually there are a couple of things that make him interesting. For one, home state representation, baby. Zacatecas gang, rise up, baby. Secondly, he is, of course, not a woman, so right off the bat, he ain't really that special, considering the top two vote getters are going to be women. So the fact that he is going to be a woman is a bit of a problem, because if it would have been cool to have all the major candidates be women, but nothing really can do that. But the last thing that is interesting was something that, funnily enough, Citali Galvez, not Galvez, what's her fucking name? She was like one of the leaders of Morena. She endorsed Porfirio Muñoz Ledo. I forget her name. Let me check. Citlali Hernandez, the Secretary General of Morena, she pointed out this very funny tidbit. And, I mean, yes, this is a funny tidbit. Like, one thing that people were, like, at first glance, you might think this election would be interesting for Mexican politics. Because it is the first time that no person from the PRI is going to be on the ballot. Claudia Sheinbaum is registered with Morena. Jorge Alvarez Mañez is registered with the Citizens Movement. Xochitl Galvez is apparently a registered independent. Or even if you want to go by like a notion of that she's registered with a party, she's either registered with the PAN or the PRD. So again, not the PRI. So it's like, the PRI doesn't run? But Hernandez pointed out a funny tidbit, the fact that he was a member of the PRI up till 2013, which is when he joined the Citizens Movement. So she literally even made a funny quip saying, I thought this was going to be the first election without the PRI. And sure enough, but apparently not. Anyways, I had 2 more stories, but I decided to just narrow it down to this last one because this one's actually relevant, good information. US and Britain strike Yemen in reprisal for Houthi attacks on shipping. Okay, so for those who don't know, the Houthis are a rebel group within Yemen, and that group has been heavily supportive, at least allegedly supportive of Palestine. So they have started attacking shipments in the seas that are near their area in retaliation against how the West is treating Palestine right now. And in response, the US and Britain are sending airstrikes to Yemen to attack them. And we've been seeing a lot of people talk about this. And I think the first one to talk about, like the first thing we need to talk about is, like, who are the Houthis? What do the Houthis represent? Blah, blah, blah. The Houthis are a Shia Islamist group that has basically been relevant since 1994. Basically made up of a couple of Shias, like Zaidi Shias, with the namesake being drawn from the Houthi tribe in the area. They are not like technically the government of like the area, but they are a group that has very heavy prevalence within the area. And they're not the best group of people. I mean, their flag, literally, like their flag or their insignia is literally having them call death to 2 countries and to have a curse on a certain religious group. And I think you can piece together who it is. Very bad hombres. Now, be that as it may, this has led to a little bit of a controversy due to the fact that many people argue that the unilateral bombing and like sending drones to attack them is unconstitutional due to the fact that it violates the War Powers Act, due to the fact that Biden has unilaterally decided to attack a foreign nation without the aid of Congress. Many of the usual suspects that you would expect, basically non-interventionist members of the U.S. Congress, you know, like some on the right, some on the left, like, you know, Ro Khanna has been a huge person who's been advocating for this. I think Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib also released a statement on this attack. And every single member of Congress has been getting a lot of pushback for expressing this opinion. One of the biggest ways that this has been going on is through community notes. Like, let me use Cori Bush as an example. Here is her current post on Twitter that has talked about this. At POTUS can't launch airstrikes in Yemen without congressional approval. This is illegal and violates Article 1 of the Constitution. The people do not want more of our taxpayer dollars going to endless war and the killing of civilians. Stop the bombing and do better by us. With the community notes stating here, Congress has acknowledged the inherent executive power of the president to take military action in response to acts of terrorism in both the War Powers Resolution and the joint resolution passed by Congress on September 14th, 2001. With Cori also stating, the War Powers Resolution clearly states 3 conditions under which presidents have the authority to introduce U.S. forces into armed hostilities. In this case, none have been met. There is no congressional action and no national emergency. The POTUS does not have the authority to bomb Yemen. And she states right here, like, here's the thing. Presidential executive power as commander-in-chief. Limitation: the constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief to introduce U.S. armed forces into hostilities or in situations where eminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances are exercised only pursuant to a declaration of war, specific statutory authorization, or a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, its territories, or its possessions, or its armed forces. And I'm seeing a lot of people going legally, the president actually can unilaterally decide to do this stuff because it's not technically a declaration of war. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure that's the point that they're trying to make. Like, the fact that he can do this is the problem. It's like, yeah, that's part of the problem. And like the U.S. unilaterally being able to decide to go to war or to start armed conflicts with other countries is a problem. That's why stuff like the War Powers Resolution was passed in the first place. Like, do you guys remember how the War Powers Resolution actually ended up passing in Congress? The reason why was because of the Vietnam War, because LBJ decided to get involved in Vietnam without the approval of Congress. So then Congress passed a bill saying that in order to continue the war, you need our approval first. Like, we understand this. Like, the War Powers Resolution was passed in fucking, like, 1973, and the most recent quote-unquote update to the law is from, like, 2001 with the authorization of military force because of its vague technicalities in regards to how it is. And that's why we're able to keep getting involved in these foreign affairs through drone warfare and other sort of stuff like that. Because, shock of all shocks, it's not in the books. There's nothing in there that says that Biden has to call for approval to launch a drone because we didn't have drones back then. But anyways, Corey, Rashida, Roe are in the right. Everyone else is wrong. Speaking of wrong, let's move on to the main topic of this video. My problems with OurRevolution. Oh boy, I picked the best org to come back on. The one that allegedly started it all. OurRevolution. Now, for those who don't know what OurRevolution is, I guess I'll have to explain some history. OurRevolution is the political organization founded by Bernie Sanders in the immediate aftermath of his 2016 bid for president. In fact, this organization is essentially him reshaping his presidential campaign into a political organization. Like, that's essentially what happened. Other progressive organizations were founded in that same vein, but they were ones that didn't really have that rich affiliation with Bernie at all. Alright, so the express purpose of this organization was to continue Bernie's quote-unquote political revolution, you know, the thing that he ran on very heavily in his 2016 bid, that they needed a political revolution. And of course the plan would be for Bernie to try and elect like-minded candidates to political office with that vein. Like, literally, and this organization, it was started like in the immediate aftermath of Bernie losing the presidency. Like, essentially, like, after he left, like, after he formally closed his bid for office, he opened the doors to OurRevolution. Now, despite the fact that this is technically considered the legal successor to his presidential bid, I mean, literally, if you go to the OurRevolution Wikipedia page, literally, it says precursor Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. Like, many of the people who were prominent individuals within Bernie's 2016 campaign moved on to work very heavily within OurRevolution. But due to a lot of legal jargon, it's considered a social welfare organization, and thus, political candidates cannot officially work for the organization. So Bernie, even though he is basically super affiliated with the organization, doesn't really have that much association with it outside of being the literal face of it. Like, he doesn't handle the behind-the-scenes stuff. I guess it's not really where his thing, it's not really where he shines. It's more focused on other people who do it, such as Larry Cohen, who is the co-chair, like the chair of the organization, and Nina Turner, who serves as the organization's president. As I said before, this organization is considered the one that started it all. Like, the one that is regarded as, like, the organization that kickstarted the modern-day progressive movement that we all kind of understand remains to this day, with other organizations following suit, such as Justice Democrats, Brand New Congress, among others. Now, what's interesting is that this organization, like, immediately got to work, like, literally, almost immediately after its foundation, a mere 6 days, in fact, the organization made its first announcement, an endorsement for political office. A candidate in Florida District 23. I sure hope nothing bad goes wrong there. Afterwards, the organization gave a decent amount of general election endorsements, such as members of Congress who backed Bernie, Grijalva, Ellison, Gabbard, etc., 2 Senate nominees, Misty Snow, a transgender Senate nominee in Utah, and Russ Feingold, and they gave a lot of endorsements in Vermont. Gee, I wonder why Bernie would give a lot of endorsements in Vermont. And they endorsed really broad. Their endorsements went all the way down to State House. Very impressive. After that, the organization was hard-pressed to move forward and finally make the Bernie takeover of the Democratic Party official. Like, one of their first like 2017, for those who don't remember, 2017 was kind of the year that many people were like, okay, this is the one. We can finally take over the Democratic Party, because tensions were big. They had a lot of things that were going on. Like, due to the fact that the DNC was in a ton of shit, they had to have a, like, Democratic chair convention, and one of the people who was running was Bernie Sanders endorser Keith Ellison, long-standing progressive, who was running very heavily on trying to reform the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, it didn't work. But also, Bernie and OurRevolution endorsed a ton of candidates in, like, special elections that were in 2017. California District 34, Montana's at-large district, Kansas District 4. But unfortunately, they really didn't have much success there. But 2018 was the next step. But things kind of started going sour again, because an article was released entitled "Bernie's Army is in Disarray," and the article was going all in depth about OurRevolution, claiming that the organization was not doing well with fundraising, and the candidates were not really doing so hot. And here's the thing, like, that's technically true, but not necessarily, because, like, they even noted that there were some candidates that did do well, but the candidates that did do well were ones that weren't really that closely affiliated with OurRevolution, and were mostly affiliated with other ones. I think they mentioned AOC, and they point out the fact that AOC was mostly fundraised by Justice Democrats as opposed to OurRevolution, going so far as to pin all of the blame and dysfunction on Nina Turner, claiming that Nina Turner was using the organization to possibly run for president her own self and to, quote, settle scores with the Democratic National Committee from 2016. Another thing Nina got flack for was the fact that she had the organization endorse Dennis Kucinich and Tara Samples for the Ohio governor and lieutenant governor's race, due to the fact that Nina Turner and Tara Samples were friends. That same year, Lucy Flores resigned from the organization, believing that they were not doing much outreach to the Latino community, mimicking many accusations that were levied towards Bernie Sanders during his 2016 campaign. Despite most people at the time acknowledging that this was a bit of a hit piece towards OurRevolution, things just didn't really pick back up for the organization. Like, I mean, I'll be honest, I never really cared that much for OurRevolution. Like, all the momentum that OurRevolution seemingly was going to have faded away immediately after the 2018 election, because the energy got sucked out by organizations that had a lot more notable successes, i.e., at the time, Justice Democrats, who in turn would face a little bit of energy sucking from their own end, because many people by that point would start to get tired of just the label progressive and Justice Democrat, and would just evolve to be more affiliated with, like, explicit socialism, which is where DSA ended up getting more prevalent. Now, what's kind of weird is, despite this fact, I think, by a technicality, OurRevolution is the most successful of any of these, like, post-2016 Bernie Sanders organizations. And the reasons why have to do with, I guess, some of the problems. Now, first, let's tackle this thing that is a quote-unquote problem: the 2018 drama Because the 2018 drama for OurRevolution was a bit weird. Because you were kind of going in a lot of different ways. Some people were trying to claim, like basically one of the big things that has been claimed was that OurRevolution was basically like a tight-knit group of friends. You know, especially that levy towards Nina Turner. And that accusation like, oh, this organization is trying to like cause drama, like refight battles from 2016. It's like, that's technically true, but is that necessarily wrong? Like for example, like, I mean, let's be real. If you are one of the few pro-progressive candidates in Congress, aren't you going to necessarily like align with each other? And in that same vein, like Nina Turner endorsing like Tara Samples, like having OurRevolution endorse Tara Samples, a person she's friends with, it's like, yeah, she was a progressive politician in Ohio. There aren't that many progressive politicians from Ohio. Literally out from Ohio. It's literally her, Tara Samples, and fucking Dennis Kucinich. I mean, like, yeah, I get that it might seem like a little weird, but it doesn't necessarily seem like that bad. The only one where it might seem like a little bit weird, that I found it to be like even remotely like a little bit like questiony, would be the 2021 Ohio District 11 race, where Nina Turner got a ton of support from OurRevolution, when it's a little bit in the air on whether or not she's still affiliated with the organization or not. Some places she's still listed as OurRevolution's president, but like there's nothing on the official OurRevolution website that says who's like the new president or not. But like we see some things that say like, oh, she's like the former president of OurRevolution. It's like, okay, then who's the current president of OurRevolution? I mean, I'm genuinely confused. You don't say who it is. And it's like, I'd like to know who it is so I could explain, like, my grievances or, like, whatever. But, like, how affiliated of the organization was she when she, like, how former was it? Was it, like, I would assume, I guess technically, she would have had to leave by the time that Bernie launched his 2020 bid. But it's like, did she? I don't know. They don't really explain that. I haven't really seen anything. But one other criticism from the article that kind of is a bit, like, understandable is the accusation, like, that even the people that the organization, quote-unquote, like, helps is, like, not really that tertiary, like, that doesn't really benefit that much from the organization. And that is true. Like, to be fair, OurRevolution does not really spend that much. And I'm looking at the Open Secrets page for OurRevolution, the OurRevolution pack. And according to it, they're not really that much big spenders. Like, let's take a look. Okay, so in the 2018 elections, well, I guess I would lump 2017 in as well. They only gave money to 5 candidates: James Thompson, Amar Kampa-Najjar, Jess King, J.D. Schulten, and Liz Watson. But I know for a fact they endorsed a lot more candidates. Okay, so in 2020, they only gave to 3 candidates: Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, and Mike Siegel. Okay, so 2022, they, again, only gave money to 4 candidates: Jamal Bowman, Mondaire Jones, Karen Carter-Peterson, and Nina Turner. And for Nina, they gave vastly more money to her than they did to any of the other candidates. So, according to this, Mondaire Jones got $2,500, as well as Jamal, and Karen Carter-Peterson got $5,000. Meanwhile, Nina got $15,000. It does make a bit of sense, understanding the fact that she was the candidate that was probably the biggest of those ones, and apparently, they've been helping Rashida Tlaib a little bit in this upcoming cycle, which makes sense. But they don't really help financially with the candidates. So I'd assume that their help is mostly for publicity, like publicity for the candidates. Which might be good, except for one big problem. OurRevolution's, like, endorsements are too fucking lenient. OurRevolution might be good if maybe they were explicitly socialist and only explicitly endorsed socialist candidates, but since the organization is simply progressive, anybody that is considered a progressive gets endorsements from can get on the page for OurRevolution and get their support. The first candidate that made people question on whether or not the organization was really quote-unquote progressive was the fact that they endorsed Jimmy Gomez, who has been accused of basically being a progressive in name only, usually due to relations with many of his fundraisers. The fact that he got a lot of money from a lot of questionable organizations, some of which were even in the private prison industry. Another questionable thing was the fact that they have a propensity to endorse people that I guess would be dubbed the runoff progressives. Like people that are not necessarily that progressive, but are progressive enough to support them in a runoff if the real progressive is kicked off the ballot, but otherwise not really progressive. The two examples that I can list here are Georgette Gomez versus Josie Caballero. But the biggest situation that I think most people got genuinely mad at was the situation regarding the special election in Louisiana's 2nd District in 2021, when there were 3 prominent Democrats in the race. Troy Carter, who was the most right-wing of the Democrats, versus 2 people claiming to be progressives. One was Karen Carter Peterson, who had run for this seat previously against Troy Carter, actually. But another one was a more activist-oriented candidate by the name of Gary Chambers. And Gary Chambers was very, very, very well known to a lot of progressives online. And many of which were saying that he would be the best chance for a real, progressive to get elected in Louisiana. If you're a watcher of this channel, you might actually remember Gary Chambers also ran for Senate and ran with very infamous, shocking ads. And he was very well known for a bit of an aggressive, progressive attitude in the 2021 election. But what ended up happening, as I mentioned, was that they ended up giving their support to Karen Carter Peterson, which I mentioned at the time makes a little sense. Gary Chambers, let's be real, it didn't really look like Gary Chambers was going to be that big of a factor in the race, except for his weight. Who said that? But then, when election day finally came, the results were as follows. In the first round, Troy Carter got 36.38% of the votes. Karen Carter Peterson got 22.92% of the votes. And Gary Chambers got 21.31%. Meaning that he was actually in striking distance of making it to the runoff. Would that have succeeded to a general election? I don't know. But the fact that he was that close to making it to the runoff made people question OurRevolution's choice to not endorse him, saying if he did manage to get that endorsement, then maybe, perhaps, he could have actually pulled through. And in that same vein, they're a little bit confusing on how they handle incumbent endorsements. You see, in 2018 and their first one, 2016, they were very, very weird. They were actually pretty simple in regards to their endorsements for incumbents. They basically only backed people who backed Bernie's 2016 bid, which again led to the accusation of it's just a tight-knit group of friends. But then sometimes they just get a little weird. For starters, one big thing is that they'll endorse a person in one election, then, next election, they won't endorse that person. I think they endorsed Jamie Raskin in his first election and maybe in his 2018 re-election bid, but I don't think they have endorsed him since. Now, I don't know if they want to just, get some general election endorsements to, help the organization get bigger, but they really just haven't, sometimes they'll just be weird, especially in 2020. In 2020, they went really beyond for some of their endorsements that were very weird. In 2020, they made general election endorsements of Frederica Wilson, Ted Lieu, Jared Huffman, Danny K. Davis, and Steve Cohen. Now, these are candidates in deep blue seats that are not really that progressive at all, that for some reason they just decided to endorse for, I don't know why. I don't know why of all the people they would endorse these guys. Maybe if these guys were red seat people, then maybe you can make the case like why they would endorse them. Like, okay, this is probably the most progressive we're going to get in this seat. And, you know, these are people who are going to be facing tough re-election bids. So naturally, we should help them however they need help. But again, for some fucking reason, they decided to endorse these guys. I don't get it. And the last round of their endorsements can sometimes be a bit weird. Because sometimes, I mean, let's be real, sometimes they'll endorse a candidate. Like, we all do this sometimes. We'll back a candidate. Then when push comes to shove, they turn out to be crap. And here are 4 examples of them doing that. First, Amar Campa-Najjar. I genuinely don't know what the heck happened. For some reason, Amar Campa-Najjar, literally, first election, super far left guy. Next election, literally to the point where he's like, oh, the Democrats are too far left. I genuinely have no fucking clue how that happened. Grifting for the sake of grifting, obviously. Another person he enthusiastically endorsed, John Fetterman. Moving on, another person he enthusiastically endorsed, first person to get the fucking, like, accusation of, like, settling scores, Tim Canova in Florida District 23, who is now a literal goddamn fascist. I mean, literally just, like, just, wow, I honestly cannot believe, like, how far he could fall. It just seems so surreal that he went that far. But of course, we can't talk about grifters within our revolution without mentioning the biggest one of all, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi seemingly was Bernie's friend and Nina Turner's friend. I have genuinely no clue what the heck happened, so it's just like so fucking weird. Again, grifting for the sake of grifting. Now, the last major criticism I have with OurRevolution is this one is just kind of weird, because I went to their website just to check on a few things, and this website kind of makes me think that there might be a larger problem with OurRevolution, and I think generally the organization might be running on fumes, and that's why, like, since a lot of the energy was taken out and focused more on like stuff like DSA and Justice Democrats, etc., OurRevolution kind of just sat on the back burner, and now I think the organization is kind of just running on fumes. And nowhere is that more prevalent than the OurRevolution website. First of all, they only list 3 endorsed candidates for 2024. Bit of a depressing thing. But bigger issues come from when you go to their past champions part. So Maxine Waters is listed under Illinois. She's not a representative from Illinois. She's a representative from California. A candidate by the name of Wendy Derwatcher is listed twice on the page. A candidate by the name of Van Hoyle, incumbent representative, she is listed under Ohio, when she's in fact from Oregon. And Washington is listed twice on that page. One of the Washingtons lists their sole representative that they endorsed as Mark Pocan, a candidate from Wisconsin. Meanwhile, the other one is correct and has Jae-Myung and other Washington politicians. So yeah, hopefully someone from OurRevolution sees this and updates their website. So those are my problems with OurRevolution. Will these get fixed? Will these even matter? I don't know. And let's just see what happens. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to our website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.